Good morning. We welcome you with the heartiest and warmest of holiday cheer to this morning. My name is Chris Seipel. I'm the President Emeritus of the Institute for Global Engagement. And on behalf of the Institute and the Embassy of the Republic of Uzbekistan, we welcome you to the discussion today. The discussion is going to be about how we mark the progress that has been made in Uzbekistan regarding religious freedom. And toward that end, we're going to talk about three broad topics and what other topics that you may want to engage during the question and answers. But those three topics are as follows. One, we would like to talk about what has been done pursuant the removal of Uzbekistan from the country of particular concern list. The next topic, which is the most important in some ways, is what will happen next? What are the concrete steps and actions that will be taken by Uzbekistan? And then the third is, what does this mean for the region? What does it mean for the Muslim majority world and the rest of the world? Is there a model here in terms of countries coming off of the CPC list that is useful or can be applied to other places? So what we will do is we will first hear from His Excellency Ambassador Javlon Vakapov, and he will speak first, and then we will hear from Mr. Knox Thames, who is the Special Envoy for Religious Minorities from the United States State Department. And then we will hear from the Institute for Global Engagement's James Chen, who will be talking about the practicality of what the model actually looks like and what it means for an NGO from the bottom up to be working with the government from the top down as we think about what the model actually is. And then we'll open up for Q&A, and we'll be done by 11 as promised. So thank you again for being here, Mr. Ambassador.
So once again, good morning, distinguished panelists, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. So it is always a pleasure to be back at the National Press Club, the place where we are continuing to introduce new Uzbekistan to the world community. Today we are, as it was mentioned, marking Uzbekistan's progress in advancing religious freedom that was highly praised by many in the White House, State Department, the Hill, and finally Secretary Pompeo's recent decision on the removal of Uzbekistan from the list of countries of particular concern has become yet another recognition of the success of reforms and changes taking place in Uzbekistan nowadays. So I need to emphasize that within past 6 months, there were series of acknowledgements of Uzbekistan's progress on human rights issues, as we've seen them in trafficking in person report by the Department of State, Department of Labor's TDA report on forced labor issues, and removal of Uzbek cotton from the list of goods produced by child labor, and many, many others. So we highly value that our efforts resonate with the international community. Latest testament of it was the unanimous support of Uzbekistan-led United Nations resolution, enlightenment and religious tolerance that was supported actually by vast majority of the United Nations member states. This resolution provides universal access to education, eliminating illiteracy and ignorance. So I need to stress that thanks to Department of State's decision, recent decision, we've managed to overcome one of the last challenge to turn a new page in our bilateral relations. Dear friends, I was following social media just to know how these decision was pursued by the public of Uzbekistan. And what was the reaction of the people of Uzbekistan? And to my surprise, I noticed that many still wonder how Uzbekistan ended up in the CPC list. How the country, proud of its centuries-long traditions of tolerance and interreligious coexistence, with its world-renowned scholars like Imam Bukhari, who the author of the Hadith collection, the holy book regarded in Muslim world as second to Holy Quran. How the land with ancient roots of Christianity and its Nestorian church with St. Daniel's tomb that is located in Samarkand, a pilgrimage site for common worship among Muslims, Christians, and Jews. How the society of tolerance with more than 140 nationalities and 16 religious denominations, the country that has never ever seen both religious and ethnic tensions and violence, became even associated with such a list. It's too difficult to answer this question. The answer is not that simple. There were ups and downs in our bilateral relations, as you may know, but there are always ways to overcome these challenges through strengthening partnership, fostering dialogue, and building the trust. I admit that in the past there were restrictive policies in the field of religious affairs, policies that thought to prevent the spread of foreign-based religious extremism, threatened to the survival of Uzbekistan's secular state. But today, our country is confidently presenting a new model of Muslim-majority secular state, in which the moderate and enlightened practices of Islam and many other religions and faiths are able to flourish. Today, Uzbekistan is a country where the new leadership is openly tackling backlog of challenges, discussing them with our own people, and decisively introducing measures. First, in order to eliminate past practices, and second, to enhance the level of protection of civil rights, particularly religious freedom. Uzbekistan is a country which is rewriting the 20-year-old law on freedom of conscience and religious organization to ensure religious freedom according to the international standards. The country where everyone, regardless of age, race, religion, and beliefs, can freely attend both mosques and churches. It is a country where thousands are pardoned, thousands removed from the security watch list, and have already returned to normal life and even get their previous jobs. It is a country where all nationalities and confessions often celebrate together the different holy days. The country where the president of Muslim majority state could congratulate all the Christians with the birth of Christ, as it was happened, in fact, last year. Today, Uzbekistan is a country that overcoming persisting challenges through reforms and change, bearing the voices of people and consulting with international partners. This is a new Uzbekistan, a country with significant progress that fully deserves to be acknowledged. One could ask, what are the major implications of Uzbekistan's removal from CPC list, as well as adoption of the United Nations General Assembly resolution on religious issues, also initiated by Uzbekistan. First of all, we feel widespread support in our efforts to improve our international perception, to strengthen Uzbekistan's image and its standing. Secondly, we realize interconnection between human rights and trade and investment issues. Aforementioned achievements pave the way for greater attractiveness of Uzbek economy for US and international investors. Thirdly, Uzbekistan could be seen, as it was mentioned previously, as offering a unique model of ensuring peace and prosperity in multi-ethnic and multi-confessional society. So far, a great deal of work has already been done, and much needs to be done. So today, I won't go in details of our record of actions taken so far. I would like to draw your attention at our further steps towards ensuring religious freedom in Uzbekistan. So we are committed to fully implementing the provisions of the roadmap that was adopted by the National Assembly of Uzbekistan this year, roadmap that is based on recommendations of the UN Special Rapporteur after his visit to Uzbekistan last year. We will precisely drafting a new law on religious freedom, providing broader guarantees and protection for religious organizations, further simplifying their registration in Uzbekistan. We stand ready to work closely with relevant US government agencies, in particular Department of State, Congress, OSCE, and other partners to bring the best ever model law on religious freedom. I need to state with regret that there were incidents related to raids on Baptist Church just prior to a few days before the decision took place. I assume that this was one of the reasons why Uzbekistan is remaining in a watch list. I need to admit that there are some difficulties. There are some difficulties with the implementation of our law, especially at the regional, local level. But they are all reduced to a few incidents and are not systematic in nature. However, I would like to specifically note that Uzbekistan has committed to preventing raids on unregistered religious organizations and groups, and the government will suppress such violations and all the offenses will be prosecuted by law. Yesterday, I was speaking to Minister Kamilov, Foreign Minister Kamilov, who once again reassured that the government of Uzbekistan is committed to stop all those raids took place in the past. And the government is committed again to implementing that roadmap and even drafting the law that I mentioned above on religious freedom. So to continue the success of the first ever Ministerial on advancing religious freedom in DC last July, attended by Uzbekistan delegation led by Foreign Minister Kamilov, we offered our proposal to arrange next regional ministerial to advance religious freedom in Uzbekistan in 2019. We are standing ready to promote the mutual exchange of delegations and experts from the research and religious organizations in Uzbekistan and the United States, and welcome the interaction with US NGOs to scope out a workshop on religious tolerance and preventing violent extremism. So, dear friends, Uzbekistan is gradually following the path of reforms that are being implemented, not for the sake of reforms, not to please someone, even here, but to serve primarily the interests of our people. We recognize that this path might be challenging, but we are looking to the future with confidence. And I believe that our firm commitment to irreversible reforms and change, there will be many more great achievements. And one of them, I hope, Uzbekistan's removal from the watch list. Thank you so much.
It's often noted how Uzbekistan lies at the heart of Central Asia, at the crossroads of many great civilizations. Uzbekistan has played an important role in that region's history and will continue to do so. And we believe that the reforms initiated by President Mirziyoyev will likely increase that important role. We at the State Department have applauded the spirit of engagement by the President and Foreign Minister Kamilov, as well as Senator Safayev and Ambassador Vahabov. They in turn have welcomed our recommendations. As a result, over the past 2 years, the President and his administration has initiated a range of important religious freedom reforms. We view these actions as significant, concrete actions that should improve the climate for religious freedom for all Uzbeks. Some actions to date that we welcomed and took note of include the releasing of over 1,000 religious prisoners held for their religious beliefs, the government delisting thousands of individuals from blacklists who were previously accused of engaging in religious extremism. The government reports that could be over 20,000 people. The government registering 13 Muslim religious organizations and the first Christian church in almost a decade, the Presbyterian Church Sviet Miru. The government allowing the Muslim majority population to practice more freely, including open prayer, better access of children to religious institutions, and the celebration of key religious holidays. These actions were taken were the result of a range of actions taken by the government, which I think really began with the invitation that the government extended to the UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion and Belief, Ahmed Shahid. It was the first such special mandate holder to visit the country in over a decade, and the first for this specific topic. Dr. Shahid was able to make a comprehensive visit and released a very thorough report. And remarkably, Uzbekistan's parliament in May 2018 approved a religious freedom roadmap based entirely on the recommendations of Dr. Shahid. Now, I will say, just parenthetically, I've been working in this space for almost 20 years, and usually when UN reports of this nature are issued, they're either ignored or discounted. I can honestly say I've never seen a country respond in such a tangible way by creating a process to enshrine UN recommendations into their own domestic law. The roadmap that the Parliament passed detailed a whole-of-government approach to reform existing laws and regulations to ensure Uzbekistan adheres to international human rights obligations and commitments and to ensure individual religious freedom. Now, I did see the impact of these reforms myself. I and my colleague Samir Hossein visited Uzbekistan in June, and we had a range of very constructive meetings with government officials, religious groups, and civil society leaders. We discussed issues such as releasing religious prisoners, registering religious organizations, and lifting restrictions on religious literature. And I have to say it was personally very powerful to attend the large cathedral mosque in Tashkent on Friday and to see the overwhelming number of people attending and the numerous children able to attend, something that had been prohibited in the past. Based on Uzbekistan's initial reform steps, in July we invited Uzbekistan to participate in the Secretary's Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom. The only CPC country to attend, Secretary Pompeo noted about Uzbekistan in his remarks, quote, "We applaud the steps that Uzbekistan is taking towards a more free society. We have great confidence that a degree of religious freedom greater than before will have a positive ripple effect on their country, their society, and the region as well," end quote. And then in September, the Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, visited Uzbekistan, where he met with President Mirziyoyev and discussed the economic and security benefits that come from increased recognition and protection of religious freedom. He met with religious groups and civil society as well to also understand the impact of the reforms to date. And then, the reason we're here, on November 28, Secretary Pompeo announced his annual designation of countries of particular concern. For the first time since 2006, Uzbekistan was not on that list. It was an important recognition of progress made. Now, as the ambassador mentioned, Uzbekistan was placed on a special watch list due to remaining restrictions that we have concerns about, and we're hopeful that the completion of remaining reforms will result in Uzbekistan being removed from that list as well. So I want to congratulate the government of Uzbekistan on the steps taken so far. It is a credit to the president, the foreign minister, and the ambassador. We also recognize that additional steps are needed, and I think the government does as well. So we no longer see systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of religious freedom, which is the high benchmark for CPC designation. But we want to see Uzbekistan take additional steps, and I'll outline a few of them, and I'm happy to note that the ambassador has already referenced an intent to address these in his remarks. The first is to move on the roadmap to reform laws through parliamentary action and the passing of a new religion law. So we're very encouraged that a new law is in the works being drafted. I will say the roadmap is very ambitious, and if met, it would bring Uzbekistan's laws and policies in line with many European countries and international standards. But because of the ambitious nature of it, we encourage Uzbekistan to invite international human rights experts to help them in this effort. We know that the OSCE stands ready to offer assistance, as well as possibly the Council of Europe's Venice Commission. We've also had conversations with the Institute for Global Engagement and Brigham Young University to bring their expertise to bear. And there are some steps we think can be taken now in the immediate term. More action is needed on registration. We have been and will continue to encourage Uzbekistan to swiftly register all religious groups that are seeking that status. We know of 22 such organizations, including the Jehovah's Witnesses, who have submitted their paperwork and are eager to operate within the confines of the law. These groups are not secret, and they operate openly. We believe that bringing them into the registration system it would be unlikely that this would cause any social disruption, but rather limit other problems and violations, one of which is the issue of the police raids, which the ambassador spoke to. Of course, we're troubled about such reports, and registration would actually help solve that problem by removing the justification for such actions. But I'm very pleased to learn of the ambassador's and his government's commitment that unregistered police raids on unregistered churches, rather, will no longer be permitted. So in closing, I'm very optimistic about Uzbekistan. The United States recognized the progress made to date and delisted it from the CPC designation. We know progress will not always be linear, so we appreciate President Mirziyoyev's commitment to reform and to refrain from implementing old policies that were problematic. The Secretary made a bold move by recognizing this initial progress and the promise of future progress. So it's critical that we continue to work together, and I'm sure we will. Lastly, I just want to make a broader note that we want to encourage other CPC countries to follow Uzbekistan's example and to begin a similar effort towards reform. It's in every country's interest to get this issue right, to provide space for the free and peaceful practice of belief. Uzbekistan's removal from the CPC list is an example of how the United States will recognize concrete reforms and high-level commitments when reviewing CPC designations. Every year, we engage all CPC countries in Central Asia and other regions of the world with suggestions on reform. I want to thank Uzbekistan for wisely taking us up on that offer, and now we have a major result to show for it. And this opportunity exists for all other countries on the CPC or watch list. So thank you very much, and thank you for hosting this today.
morning. I thought I would share a little bit about the Institute for Global Engagement and our recent visit to Uzbekistan, as well as the MOU that we signed, and go over some of the practical projects that we have agreed on. Last September, we had the opportunity to go to Uzbekistan. We brought a delegation of leading Muslim and Christian leaders from the civil society here in the US. Some of those people included people like Imam Talib Sharif, who is the Imam of the Nation's Mosque here in Washington, D.C., the first Muslim mosque in the country, U.S. Air Force veteran himself. The mosque is involved with in collaboration with the U.S. government and things about countering violent extremism. We also had a Professor Sherman Jackson, who is the King Faisal Chair in Islamic Thought and Culture at University of Southern California. We also had folks like Pastor Bob Roberts, who's the pastor of a Baptist pastor of a church in Dallas, is very active in Muslim-Christian engagement, and Chris Seipel here with us as well, and some other folks. And the purpose of that was to illustrate how religious folks, people that take their faith seriously, are present in all sectors of society, whether it's clergy, academia, philanthropy, media, NGO, and they all have a positive role to play. And so we were able to bring this delegation over in September, and we had meetings with various representatives of religious communities in Tashkent, including Protestants, Catholics, Muslims, obviously, and evangelicals. We also had a chance to meet with the faculty and students at the International Islamic Academy in Tashkent. Had a great exchange with them over there, open Q&A and topics ranging from things in the U.S. and had a chance to visit the Center for Islamic Civilization, and as well as go to Samarkand and to view the Imam al-Bukhari Memorial Complex and the International Research Center that's being constructed there. So just really had an opportunity to try to get a sense of what the situation was on the ground, and also to see what could be done moving forward. And so with this memorandum of understanding, we had the opportunity that we've been able to engage with primarily two organizations. First is the Institute of Strategic and Regional Studies under the President of the Republic of Uzbekistan, and also the Independent Institute for Monitoring the Formation of Civil Society. So IGE, we've signed an MOU with these two organizations, and this MOU was drafted over a period of 8 months. We've gone through multiple iterations. There's Uzbek translations, French translations, English translations that are all synchronized, and it's available on IG website if you're interested in the exact text. But primarily, the goal and the spirit is to undertake joint research and activities in advancing religious freedom in Uzbekistan. And we were also very fortunate to have our visit coincide with the visit of the Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, who was in Tashkent at the time and was able to witness the signing of the MOU. And so when we sign MOUs like these with countries, we've done similar things in countries like Vietnam, and it's really to show and demonstrate how if you want to have sustainable change in terms of improving religious freedom, there needs to be not only the top-down change, you have changes in laws and policies, but also you need bottom-up change, changes in the perceptions of the general public, changes of cultural norms and values in terms of buying into norms surrounding what religious freedom means. And so in contexts where even the term religious freedom could have some very negative connotations or some misunderstandings, it's necessary to be able to engage from both the top down and the bottom up. And so that's the purpose of the MOU, and basically laying down a framework of the practical projects that we hope to undertake in the months and years ahead. So let me just go over some of these. First is to build a foundation of indigenous academic scholarship on religious freedom, on rule of law, religion, and rule of law. Very often, different countries, they don't even have academically rigorous scholarship in whatever that native language is on the implications of religious freedom. And if you want to inculcate change, you want to see change, you need to do that at the academic or the policy-making level. And so often there's just no or very little resources available in that matter. And so, one of the projects that the ISRS and IG will be engaging in is building that foundation, identifying scholars in the country that are very interested in pursuing this and being able to provide resources in the native languages as well as in English to be used. Also, there's an agreement to set up multi-faith religious freedom roundtables. These roundtables would be somewhat modeled on the International Religious Freedom Roundtable that we have here on Capitol Hill. Basically, it's an informal group of organizations involved in international religious freedom here in DC, and you have groups ranging from all the different religious communities, and being able to inform each other, coordinate with each other, as well as to engage the US government. And so we see a similar model being able to be implemented in Uzbekistan. Third would be holding a conference to explore the positive role of religion. It could seem quite innocuous, but in certain contexts, religion has been seen as a source of suspicion or as a source of potential instability or something to be controlled. And so it's worth having kind of confidence looking at just what are the positive roles that religious communities, religious leaders can play in society. Fourth would be the holding of religion and rule of law certificate training programs. These are programs that IGE has been conducting in countries like Vietnam, in Myanmar for the past many years. And what these programs do is we bring together experts from different countries around the world, legal experts in religion and law, to talk about, to present a global comparative case studies of how different issues regarding religious freedom or religion and law are handled in their countries. And the participants of these programs would be ranging from government officials, from academics, from faith leaders in Uzbekistan, bringing them all together in the same room to be able to have these to have real, frank, pragmatic discussions on what could be sensitive issues like these. Having these training programs there, and that's a program that IG has partnered with Brigham Young University's International Center for Law and Religion Studies for many years. And then finally, a cross-cultural religious literacy certificate program. And this is a program that would basically train people in skill sets on how do you engage effectively and constructively across different religious communities, across different faiths, whether secular or religious. And this would also be looking to involve government officials, academics, faith community leaders. And so being able to have this multi-dimensional engagement and bring all these people in the same room, people that typically haven't been in the same room before, we found that in our experience in other countries that it's been very fruitful and helpful to advancing religious freedom at a practical, on-the-ground fashion that's able to help shape and influence mindsets. And once you can do that, you influence behavior as well. But I'd say just in the case of Uzbekistan, I mean, you heard the ambassador say reform is in the interest of the state. And I think when you get a government that recognizes that, they know that religious freedom is not just the right thing to do, but it's the sensible thing to do. It's going to help you become a stronger, more secure, and a more prosperous nation. Then it's really, everything else just follows from that. And so just really applaud just the advances that the government's making, and we also are thankful for this opportunity to walk alongside the Uzbek government and people in these efforts. Thank you very much.
Before we open the floor to questions and answers, the ambassador asked me to share some of my own reflections with you, not just because I'm the moderator and the past president of the Institute for Global Engagement, but it also happens that I wrote my dissertation on the bilateral relationship between the United States and Uzbekistan. So perhaps bring a unique perspective in terms of having interviewed almost all of the players that have been involved in this since the recognition of Uzbekistan in 1991. So I just wanted to make 3 points in that context. One is perspective. If we take a step back from what we've heard in the context of the bilateral relationship, but especially in the context of global trends. And global trends at the moment are a religious nationalism and an authoritarianism that is working against and defining against often religious minorities. It's sad, it's true, and Uzbekistan is going exactly against those trends, exactly against it. At a time when you could use all kinds of examples from around the world to validate the repression of religious minorities, they're doing the exact opposite. And all we can say to that as Americans where religious freedom is a part of our DNA, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's in our self-interest, as James just said, going back to the founding of Massachusetts and especially Rhode Island and Roger Williams. It's a remarkable thing that Uzbekistan is doing. Does it deserve its own critique? You bet. That's part of the deal. And what's amazing about what's taking place in terms of this perspective is that Uzbekistan is welcoming the critique. I've never seen anything like it. And as Knox just said, he's never seen a response to the UN like the parliament in Tashkent has responded. So in the context of global trends and in the context of Uzbekistan itself and the bilateral relationship, this is truly remarkable, truly unprecedented, truly needed. But you don't see it, and it's happening. So this is something that, again, with constructive critique, this is something we should all be supporting. I cannot say that strongly enough as someone who's studied this his whole life. Second thing is this. We need to keep perspective as we think about the past and go forward, but the second thing is people. I've been asked so many times, why is President Mirziyoyev doing this? Of course, he's not my best friend, and I don't know the answer. But my response to that question in multiple contexts, here and around the world, is always the same. I don't know, but judge him by his actions. Lots of people talk. Very few people walk that talk. He's walking the talk through these reforms, and he's not just doing religious freedom reforms to get the Americans off his back. He's doing a comprehensive set of reforms of which religious freedom is integral to and foundational to. Because religious freedom at the end of the day is saying that everybody is included in the citizenship of our country. Not just Uzbeks, but Tajiks and Karakalpaks and Kyrgyz and Russians who live in the state of Uzbekistan. That's incredible. That was a decision that he made, and we will someday know the full story about that. That's the top-down that James Chen referenced, but it's also true that in the bottom-up, it's exactly consistent with who the Uzbek people and citizens are in my own experience. Just tremendous hospitality, tremendous mutual respect across multi-confessional, multi-ethnic divide. There's no greater joy than having a cup of tea or two with an Uzbek family in Namangan or Nakus or Bukhara or wherever. It's also fun to have a shot or two of vodka with families sometimes. They're good people, and they're tolerant people, and they're respectful people. And so you have this combination of top-down and bottom-up from the president and who the people are working together at this time in history. Third point is partnerships that result. You have the perspective, and then you have the people. And by the way, from people results trust. I've known everybody on this stage for over 20 years. It's easy to have a conversation and be frank when there's trust. Talk leads to trust, and trust leads to tangibility. But you've got to have the trust. And that results from the perspective of government doing what they should and holding people accountable, as Knox and his office has done. But the approach of IGE over the years has been never to name, blame, and shame. It's been to say, we will speak truth to you behind closed doors as friends should. And let's find ways to work together. And then the result is my third point, which is partnerships. Partnerships that are practical. I'm glad that James shared the MOU. Very practical. It's not a press release. It's not something to make everybody look good, but here are the steps that take place. And the steps that take place develop the common thinking and research within the country to enable discussion through comparative discussion of examples from outside the country of different forms of religion and rule of law that have worked and not worked. And then the country decides for itself where it wants to go. That's their choice. They live there. It's nobody else's choice. And the same thing can be said for the Religious Freedom Roundtable. A little known fact is Knox and I founded that here in America 10 years ago. In response to the book launch that Knox and I and Amy Rowe did together, Knox did most of the work and we joined on for the win. And we published a book on international religious freedom. And during the question and answer period of the launch on Capitol Hill, somebody said, her name was Sue Vaughn, she says, why don't people talk about this in America? Why aren't religious organizations getting together? And so the Religious Freedom Roundtable was founded. And now Ambassador Brownback meets with it every week. There's nothing in that room politically or theologically that the group agrees on. It's the full spectrum of people. We like to joke it's like the bar scene in the first Star Wars movie. There's nothing to agree on except freedom of conscience. And that when people have freedom of conscience, they will choose to be good citizens according to the best of their holy scriptures or their moral frameworks if they're secular or humanist. Come one, come all, and let's protect our country by engaging each other and naming differences and respecting each other. So the perspective of the times we live in, the people that make the decisions and get along through which trust happens, and then the partnerships that begin to implement change, because you cannot change behavior unless you change mindset. You change mindset through relationship and then through intentional education and training programs. With that, I will close my own comments and then we'll open the floor to comments. The mic is where? I know we have one. The mic is in the back here. Who would like to ask the first question of anybody on the panel? Sir.
Good morning. Thank you all. My name is Dan Silverstein. I'm a private sector advisor, and I'm wondering if there's a practical effect to this change in designation for Uzbekistan. Does it have an effect on trade, tourism, regional cooperation, and other such practical matters? Thanks.
Ambassador.
So, thank you for the question. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we believe that the removal of Uzbekistan from the CPC list will positively affect to the growth of our economy, to the flow of FDI, and even make Uzbekistan and its economy more and more attractive, especially to foreign investors. So in this regard, as I also mentioned about other achievements that we've gained within the last 1 year, for instance, Uzbek cotton, that was also delisted from the list of goods here produced with the use of child labor. Child labor is no longer the issue in Uzbekistan nowadays. And we proceed from the understanding. So by removing these restrictions, not Uzbekistan's cotton as a raw material, but goods, value-added goods, textile goods, could be also exported abroad without any restrictions. So in these terms, we appreciate that Uzbekistan has been delisted from that list, CPC list. And of course, as you may know, everyone who is interested in the Uzbek market, he will start talking not with me. He will start looking at data, looking at sources that are indicating that Uzbekistan is becoming an open market for foreigners, that Uzbekistan has already lifted all bans with regard to trade and investments, that convertibility issues that we had in the past are also no longer the issue nowadays. So, and we consider that consider the removal of Uzbekistan from the list of CPC as a key part of all our current engagements, improving Uzbekistan's perception in the world.
Ma'am. The mic.
My name is Elena Sloan. I'm Executive Director of the American Uzbekistan Chamber of Commerce and First Middle East Ambassador of Regulations on behalf of Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies with such a significant progress. We do appreciate Uzbekistan's commitment to implementing more reforms, and like Dan indicated, and like you indicated, it does affect our company's ability to work in Uzbekistan. And surprisingly, it also influences different indices and rankings that are very important to American companies. So perhaps maybe next step is, I don't know, engaging with Millennial Challenge Corporation and also with other institutions that will be of great help to American business. But congratulations again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. There was another hand I saw. Fred?
If you would permit a comment first, thank you. Congratulations to Uzbekistan, and thanks to all four speakers. It was really wonderful presentations. Only one slight correction I'd make, and that is when this began. It didn't begin 2 years ago. It began actually around 2007 when serious discussion of legal reform began. This was a very, very important development. Rights of defendants, for example, this was all being intensely discussed after around 2007, right up to through the beginning of this present reform movement. The legal dimension is extremely important, and it's hardly been mentioned here. I think it's something that in the future we want to focus a good deal more on. This all represents, as several of you have indicated, a tremendous introspection on the part not just of Mr. Mirziyoyev, but on the part of Uzbekistan, and not an easy introspection, I assume. You know, hats off to you for that. But maybe we need to do some thinking too here. We forget, where did these policies come from? Well, there's partly, of course, the hangover from Soviet times. I won't go into that, but the very first thing that happened after independence was an attack by very radical religious extremists in Namangan, which was mentioned, Namangan. And, you know, they killed the number of local officials. They murdered the mayor, beheaded him, put his head on a stick. It was a real trauma for the country. And then later in Tashkent in 1999, I believe, and in Bukhara, there were serious explosions intended to basically to kill the head of state. And then came 2005 Andijan. Well, you know, if you read our reports by the Department of State then, they indicate that this was perpetrated by especially pious Muslims and peaceful Muslims, peaceful demonstrators. Well, they weren't. We now have 2 movies that were shot by the demonstrators themselves, the insurgents, indicating that they were very heavily armed and not just 1 or 2 machine guns, but whole ranks of them. This was a very murderous scene, and it was handled in a very clumsy manner by troops from the Department of Interior, and as a result of the real bad actions on both sides, 180 people ended up dead. Many of them, by the way, were human shields, whom the insurgents had used. These were religious extremists. These were not especially pious Muslims. Now, it was just after this that we listed them as a country, Uzbekistan, as a country of particular concern. I'm not arguing with that. I'm just saying maybe we need to think about these things also. It calls for some introspection on our part. The fact is that for many years, we have focused, as the term was, I haven't heard it for a long time, naming and shaming. I know this comes from the congressional legislation, and it's not an invention of the Department of State. I respect that. But it didn't work. I think that's the conclusion we have to draw. And what is working now, and hats off to everyone on both sides who's involved, instead of working on them, we're working with them. And that's a world apart. Now, there's one other element that I'd like to raise, and that is about, it's not been mentioned here at all, but a key to our religious freedom is a state and a system of laws and courts that are free of religion. They are not owned by anyone. And they might be staffed by very religious people, pious people, or by people with no religion or even opposed to religion. But our laws and our courts are secular. And I don't think we've half acknowledged the significance of Uzbekistan combining these various steps that are being taken with the reality of a secular state. And it seems to me without the second, you don't have the first. And it's time for the United States to acknowledge this. This is something absolutely innovative in the Muslim world. It may be the most important aspect of what's going on in Uzbekistan today. To defend and champion the secular state as such, as a necessary environment for religious freedom for all, not just for the religious. This is a very pious panel that we have today. Hats off, I'm among you. On the other hand, what about the people with no religion or who oppose it? This requires a secular state for everyone, and I hope that can be fed into our approach from now on as we work with rather than on Uzbekistan.
Thanks, Fred. Other comments, ma'am? Or question, sorry. Here's the mic.
I'm Katie Putz, the managing editor of The Diplomat. I cover Central Asia primarily. Thank you for having this event. I guess my first question is really, I think you, Mr. Thames, you mentioned that 1,000 prisoners of conscience had been released in Uzbekistan, and I think that's good news. What kind of efforts have there been to review the cases of people who had been imprisoned in the past for religious freedom kind of issues that now the state is saying, you know, we're trying to reevaluate and deal with these past, I think the word a lot of human rights activists would use would be abuses. So people who've been thrown in jail for unregistered religious activity or convicted of extremism cases that are dubious in evidence, I would say. So if anybody can comment on efforts to review individual cases from the past, because I think there's a lot more than that 1,000. And then a second question for the ambassador. You mentioned sort of the idea that there are efforts to, let's see, let me think of my question, in regards to the raids on unregistered religious groups, and that there's a somewhat of a disconnect between sort of official state policy to not do these and then sort of local responses. How does Uzbekistan plan to deal with that disconnect and sort of stubbornness on a local level to change? Governments can say this is the new rule. Your local policeman might still dislike that group meeting over there. So how do you plan to deal with sort of the stubbornness and the difficulty of addressing these things at the sort of the minute level? Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Great questions. Knox?
The issue of prisoners was a big component of the conversations for being a CPC country and for being delisted. We've had a very constructive dialogue with the Uzbek government. When we become aware of names of individuals who, through different civil society contacts, think they've been wrongly accused of, for a crime, but it's really about their religiosity. We've presented that to the Uzbek government. They have taken those requests very seriously and gotten back to us with additional information. And when they've been jailed improperly, they've been released. When we were in Tashkent in June, we met with two Uzbeks who'd been jailed for extremism that had been released and heard their stories. We also met with some of the leading human rights NGOs in the country to talk about this question. And the general sense was that the numbers are coming down, that the government is reviewing and acting on those cases where they think that there had been excessive penalization. But it's also an issue that we have encouraged the Uzbek government to start a formal review process of the remaining cases so that this chapter of Uzbek's history can be closed and the country can move forward.
Ambassador.
So regarding the rates that were mentioned in my speech, so as it was noticed, rates themselves are becoming challenging issue in Uzbekistan nowadays, and challenging in terms of, again, implementing our national legislation, mostly at local level. So the same problem we faced in the past with regard to eliminating the use of child labor. So we were internationally obliged to eradicate the use of child labor on the field. Several laws later were amended. And again, the same issue has been emerging. But this, the child labor itself, the use of child labor is no longer the issue. How we've solved this issue? First step that was taken by the government was about the legislation and amendments to current laws. The second was about the implementation of those laws. So we've started talking separately to all governors at both levels, at province level and at district level. And moreover, we've introduced several fines if this or that official, Uzbek official at a local level, once decide to use that child labor, he will be immediately both dismissed or fined by the government. That was the method we've introduced and later practiced with regard to the use of child labor. And we've eliminated it totally across the country nowadays. So what concerns the rates with regard to, again, to those churches I've mentioned, we consider here two ways. Again, the first way is related to the law on religious freedom that is supposed to be amended very soon and later will be passed by the parliament. We expect that it will take place in the beginning of 2019. I proceed from the understanding that even those rates will be mentioned in the law in its new version. So another step, as I mentioned, rates themselves as a challenging issue will be, I believe, will be prohibited by law. And moreover, we expect that all relevant law enforcement agencies will be also warned that these that such issues are impermissible in Uzbekistan. These are the main ways that we are considering nowadays.
And if I can just add, if we could bring the mic over here to the next question while that's being done. Part of the reason I believe that the Uzbek government has invited IGE and BYU into the discussion here is that per the examples of Vietnam, as James mentioned, the training is done in such a way through case studies, comparative, and it brings together all sectors of society, not just religious leaders or just lawyers, but security officials, government officials, et cetera. But it starts at the national level, and then it goes to the regions, and then to even to district workshops. And so there's an effect there that follows and is analogous to the ILO model that's been used. And so our hope is that that's one way to do it step by step as education and training changes mindset, and mindset is what changes behavior. It's a long run, but it's been initiated, and I think that's why they've invited IG and BYU to do this training thing, perhaps in conjunction with the regional ministerial sometime in maybe spring of 2019. So that's hopeful, and I think answers your question even more directly. Sir.
Thank you. Temuri Yakobashvili, recovering ambassador, I guess. So congratulations, first of all, to both of you, actually to Uzbekistan for being removed from the list, and you guys for being taken seriously finally by somebody. My question is more practical, I guess. While we are all, excited by the decisions of both sides, we all understand that Uzbekistan will need serious capacity to enforce those decisions. So, are you going to advocate for them, beside the, descriptive and prescriptive part, also to move to some action and advocate for some, I don't know, aid to the government of Uzbekistan, technical aid or any other things, training courses for policemen, whoever, if it's in your mandate, and how you are going to do it if yes, and if not, why not?
So by you guys, I assume you mean the U.S. government, so I'm going to throw that question
not only
to Knox.
U.S. government plus those who advocate for religious freedom. Because
Sure.
now you have a very vivid case and very, as you all mentioned, extraordinary case that whatever was advised was taken seriously. So I think there should be some kind of, not exactly rewarding part, but supporting part, that those decisions should be supplemented by actions that will enable them to implement these decisions practically. And I'm just piggybacking on the last question here that, what about the local levels,
Yeah.
And obviously Uzbekistan will need a serious capacity to implement it.
We couldn't agree more. As I mentioned in my remarks, we have engaged with the OSCE, and I spoke with the head of the OSCE mission in Uzbekistan while I was there in June. I spoke with the OSCE. They have a special panel of experts on religious freedom, very knowledgeable panel of jurists from around the world, from around the OSCE region rather, about helping Uzbekistan. That this roadmap, like I said, is ambitious, it's unprecedented, and they'll need technical assistance to make sure they get it right. And so they stand ready. They are just needing an invitation from the Uzbek government, and we spoke about this yesterday, and I hope that'll be forthcoming soon. In addition, we've spoken with Brigham Young University. They have a special center that has a lot of experience in legislative amendments, bringing laws into line with international standards. They're ready to help. So that's the short-term issues of this movement on legal reform. And then we're also having conversations about bringing other training programs online. We've already done a lot. We have a very good history of partnership with the Uzbeks, providing technical assistance to law enforcement officials on a variety of issues. So we're starting to look at what can we do into this space to make sure to the point you raised, that Uzbek officials, not only in Tashkent, but in all the different regions of the country, have the skills and knowledge they need to implement these new laws and policies, and to help move the country forward in this important space.
I will add a couple comments and see if James wants to add any as well. But two things. One is the U.S. Institute of Peace just made a visit to see how they might help and work on preventing violent extremism. That's obviously a government institution, and I think they're thinking about ways to practically support. They were just there last week. And then the unspoken, I don't know if it's an elephant or not, but it's unspoken audience in the room is the philanthropic community and the business community in terms of how they engage and what they might support. And those two audiences need to be in more intentional conversation to support some of the best practices and best NGOs and best journalism, by the way, for how and what the public thinks and polls and to gather and paint a whole picture of the new ecosystem that's emerging. And I think that's good for business, that's good for Uzbekistan, it's good for everybody. But those I can't speak for the business community, but I do know about the philanthropic community, and there's not enough intentional conversation in terms of who's doing the best work, who's doing the best reporting, who's giving us the best information, and walking side by side and calling attention to this. And of course, the Uzbeks are leading the way here with their transparency and all the stuff where citizens can go online and complain about local officials, which is just remarkable. So there's ways to amplify what they are already doing in that manner through the business community and the philanthropic community. But James, I don't know if you want to add anything in terms of NGOs and the IG model.
Yeah, just a little, those different training programs and projects I listed off in my talk, those are basically immediate plans for near term, but we are hoping, and I believe we do have support with our MOU partners to be conducting those multiple programs over the different years. And the more alumni you have of these programs, alumni that are from the country, they eventually coalesce and form into their own kind of a network of people that can be working for positive and constructive change in a country. And so, and this is something that we've seen in Vietnam too, the only other country that's been listed from the CPC. We've been working there for about 10 years so far with multiple training programs of this nature.
Other questions? Oh, please.
Thank you so much. I'm Navbahori Mamla from the Voice of America. Mr. Ambassador, what is the Uzbek government's strategy to work with young Muslims, both men and women? As you know, they are the majority in the country. I just got back from Uzbekistan from a month-long trip, and where many young Uzbeks have expressed concerns about the parameters of being religious in Uzbekistan. They still are struggling to be able to see the red lines. They ask many questions about who's a good Muslim in Uzbekistan and who's a bad Muslim. I'm sure you're watching the situation, and a young imam, 32-year-old Imam Fazleddin Parpiyev, just left the country, claiming that he was constantly targeted for directly calling on president to improve the situation regarding religious freedom. There are many young people who want to promote scarves and beards, and there is a very heated conversation that's going on in the country. How much of it are you watching, and how do you see the best way to work with these young crowds who want to be religious, who want to express their religious views freely? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So now, Bahar, all I know now, what you already know about that gentleman you mentioned. So as far as I know, there were any allegations against him, and anyone, as you may know, Bahar, can travel in and out Uzbekistan freely without any restrictions. So, and this gentleman is a free man who decided to leave the country, again, without any restrictions. So, but here I would like to draw your attention that any public figure, especially imams, should feel responsibility for what they are calling the people for. As it was mentioned today several times, we are the secular state. And we remember the times when some imams called even for polygamy. I know that many are dreaming about it, but although for others it might be a disaster. So, but we should not forget that Uzbekistan still remains secular state. So some other imams, as you are well aware, were demanding even on legislative level to introduce the ban to attendance of male doctors in medical care during the childbirth. So you can imagine where this may lead. So, and Mr. Parpiev, yeah, if I'm not mistaken, was calling to lift the ban on women's Islamic scarves, and that you mentioned man's beard. So in Uzbekistan, these remarks addressed mostly to Americans who are not well familiar with my country. Bearing beards and scarves are not prohibited by law. So not legally banned, and the only restriction, and it is common for many most developed countries, that they are not allowed to bear them in public places. So at the same time, we need to preserve the right for introducing a dress code and uniforms in public organizations. So this is my key point with regard to that gentleman's issue. About red lines you mentioned. I left the country one year ago, and you've just returned. I believe you have latest updates, but in my own perspective, the people of Uzbekistan feels the wind of freedom nowadays. As it was mentioned, you see, within the last 2 years, we've released more than 20,000 Uzbeks who were jailed in the past, who were charged with religious extremism and terrorism. Moreover, the president, using these authorities envisaged by the Constitution, for the first time, pardoned more than 3,000 people. And by the way, the vast majority of them, again, people who were charged with religious extremism and terrorism in the past. So, moreover, the government is creating conditions for those people who lost their jobs in the past. And now, even those who just a few months ago were jailed, now they are working for Uzbek TV. They are becoming public persons, and all gates are open for them. So this is my own perception as the person who represents the government of Uzbekistan. But would appreciate if you later share with me with your own perception that you've received during your trip to Uzbekistan. Later we'll be able to discuss it and exchange our views.
You know, I want to, if we could bring the mic over here, I'll add the comment there. One of the things that we're discussing as a part of the MOU is the idea of an exchange between cities in America and cities in Uzbekistan. And there's a program here in America where a rabbi and a imam and a pastor get together and they think about, they don't water down their differences, they talk about their theological differences and invite each other to each other's homes and to each other's houses of worship, and then they do a project together to serve the city. My point is, they're trying to figure out what it means to be I don't like these words, but just to use them, conservative or orthodox, lowercase o, what it means to be a devout believer in a secular state and serve the people around us without sacrificing our beliefs. Well, what if we could have an exchange between Seattle, where I'm from, sister city of Tashkent, the capital of Uzbekistan, faith leaders coming from Seattle over to Tashkent, and have conversations that begin to get at these questions, because they're real, and they're just as real in Tashkent as they are in Minneapolis or Seattle about what it means to be Muslim in the American context. These are important conversations, and the one we're having today can hopefully catalyze some more of those in a thoughtful, productive way. Yes, please.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Isabel Vladoyo. I'm the director of United for Human Rights International. And first of all, I would like to congratulate you, Your Excellency, for your efforts and for your work in actually advancing religious freedom and human rights specifically, and also the U.S. government and the collaboration of other NGOs who helped on this process. And I think it's very worthy that we are all here to acknowledge this as a wonderful work that you've done over the past few years. I would like to shift a bit the paradigm on from the problem to the solution. And I know, Your Excellency, you mentioned a bit in your speech, and I got the opportunity to get this book at the entrance, which is The Progress in the Field of Human Rights. And because I work with human rights, one of the chapters in the book, and I was really happy to took a glance at the book. It's about human rights education. And because I work in the field of human rights, and I a bit transitioned from being an international human rights scholar, I feel that education is very important, especially when we talk about religious freedom. It's one of the articles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. My question for you, Your Excellency, is what will the country of Uzbekistan, because I notice here it's talking about the importance of education and the fact that you've done partnership with law schools in Uzbekistan to actually implement the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights and raise the awareness on human rights education in general. However, what will be on a broader scale to implement this locally for everyone? For example, in schools. Myself personally, I have 2 master's degrees in human rights law, but I feel it's not fair, being in the 21st century, to have to go to a master's degree in law to actually know your basic human rights as they were contained in the UN Universal Declaration. So that's the question for you. What other measures, or how do you plan to implement human rights education into schools, at the local level, not only for scholars, for the legal community?
Thank you.
As it was noticed today, since 2016, Uzbekistan started opening up to the world, even in terms of creating equal conditions to all human rights organizations, international organizations. We've lifted all bans with regard to HRW. And a gentleman whom I believe you know well is free to travel to Uzbekistan, and now he is in the region. And moreover, the Uzbek authorities issued him 1-year multiple visa. All doors, of the government agencies and respective human rights authorities operating in Uzbekistan are open to talk to him. As far as I know, Steve is usually warmly welcomed even by Uzbek TV, where he delivers his concerns, his own messages with regard to even human rights education you mentioned. So the issue, how how the Uzbek government is going to introduce human rights education, starting from schools and ending with, I believe, universities. Again, with the help of those organizations, those entities, even those you represent here. Through educating, through trainings, through inviting our American friends, who even the representatives of IG institution that concluded a special MOU last September with Uzbekistan's leading national human rights organizations. By the way, that agreement was signed by three parties: IG, the research institute under the president, and the Institute for the Research in Research on Civil Society. So we believe that we've just started discussing the roadmap on implementing all those provisions laid out by that MOU, and one of the top priority that we are pursuing is again related to educating our people to help them to know about their rights, what they are allowed to do, and what they are not allowed, and even the goal is to increase their capacity building in terms of, again, increasing their knowledge about human rights and dimension. What even international conventions, agreements could provide them in terms of, again, protecting their rights. Domestically, what kind of amendments should be introduced to current laws, and many, many other issues. And I believe through such arrangements we've achieved with IG and even with human rights, all those best practices, knowledges, and even experience will be gradually introduced to our educational system at all levels.
And if I can add to that, Ambassador, if we can bring the microphone to the ambassador here. This is still under discussion, but one of the things with the IGE BYU conference is to have an intentional partner in the museum. I don't know if you've heard of them, big building down the road. But there's a Center for Religious Freedom there, and they actually have an expertise in training teachers and faculty and staff at the K through 12 level. And they have been doing this in Georgia for some time. They've been doing it in California. And I mention that for two reasons. One is America is going to be a majority-minority country soon. And we have to know how to do this and claim the best of our own history. And what is required is real skill sets. What does that look like? How do you facilitate a multi-confessional, multi-ethnic conversation simultaneously about any kind of issues? To include, by the way, which we have not talked about, gender. How do we bring women to the table as full and equal? And by the way, I should note that we tried very hard to have women participants on this panel, and it just didn't work out. So I want to assure you that Knox and James are almost their equal, but we're happy they're here anyway. They just couldn't make it. Sir.
Great, thank you very much. I'm Ambassador of Kazakhstan. My name is Yerzhan Kazikhanov. I would like to say that we welcome the sister city relations between Tashkent and Seattle, but I would like to also inform you that Almaty has a sister city relations with the great city of Tucson. So I would like to thank Ambassador Vahabov and distinguished panelists for this great session today, and extend my congratulations for the great achievement of our brotherly country, Uzbekistan, our neighbor to the south. And I would like to echo what Ambassador said in the beginning, his opening remarks, saying that there is nothing new about religious tolerance in the region of Central Asia. Starting from medieval period, Ambassador mentioned Imam Bukhari, I would mention Mirza Ulugh the region contributed a lot to the culture and science, religious tolerance, enlightenment and moderation. This has been seated deep in our hearts and minds for centuries. I would refer you to the most recent history, which is the mid of the last century, the World War II. Many of you know that there were many people escaping Nazis' invasion in Eastern Europe, in Western Russia, evacuating to the Central Asian region. And it was Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, the big countries, including Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, ambassadors here as well, who were welcoming millions and millions of people representing different religions and cultures. And they've been living with us for years. And I just had a very good meeting with our friends and partners from the Holocaust Museum. We're helping them to open a new pages of history, of Jewish history, of hundreds of thousands of Jewish families who spent between 5 to 10 years in Central Asia escaping from Nazi invasion and thus surviving the Holocaust. Not too many of you know that in Tashkent, in Uzbekistan and in Kazakhstan, we had hundreds of evangelical churches during the World War II. So what we are talking about, we just coming back to our roots. This is nothing new. We're not inventing the wheel. I mean, the religious tolerance and moderation, enlightenment sits deep in our hearts. And that is why I would like to commend the efforts of the Uzbek government and Uzbek delegation at the United Nations when they tabled a resolution called Enlightenment and Religious Tolerance. Kazakhstan became a co-sponsor of that resolution. You mentioned that the parliament took on board all the recommendations of the UN Special Rapporteur. And I think that it is a vivid example that the Uzbek government is paying attention to the most precious asset they have, which is the human capital. The human capital consists of three major big pillars. One is the soul, which is the religious freedom. The second is the heart, which is the healthcare situation. And the third is the brain, which is education. So a part of the economic progress that Uzbekistan is doing, opening up and attracting investment, they're also paying attention to the human capital. The same thing we do in Kazakhstan. And I'm sure that many countries also attach great importance to that issue. So I wish you success and all the prosperity in your noble endeavors. And also I would like to, there was a question about the tourism. I would like to say that we're introducing a Silk Road visa with Uzbekistan so that anyone willing to travel along this great Silk Road can get one visa access to the region. And everybody knows Samarkand and Bukhara and Hiva, but not too many of you know the great city of Turkestan in Kazakhstan. So what we are trying to do, we are trying to link Turkestan to the greater tourist destination, visiting all these great cities in Central Asia. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Other comments or questions or thoughts? If not, I would cede the floor back to His Excellency if he would like to close us, if he has any final comments. But on behalf of the panelists, let me say thank you for coming out today, December 20th. I know it's a busy holiday season, and this is a true sign of respect and care for some tremendous and momentous developments in Central Asia and in Uzbekistan. So thank you for being here, Mr. Ambassador.
So, dear guests, first of all, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to all attendees, especially those who represent today the US government, and all my friends, the ambassador. Thank you for coming and being with me today. Really appreciate it. So, as it was noted at the beginning, We've gathered today not to talk about our achievements. Today we've primarily summoned all of you and gathered together to define our next steps towards, again, ensuring religious freedom in Uzbekistan. And our next very hard, I believe, but at the same time very doable goal is the removal of Uzbekistan from the watch list. And I believe, taking into account all those commitments by the government of Uzbekistan that I've mentioned today in my opening remarks and later in my answers, will be implemented. And properly introduced. All those amendments we've discussed today will be also introduced to the law on religious freedom in its new version. And I expect that this law, discussions over this law are open to all our partners, the US government, OSCE, the Hill itself, IG, and other international organizations who could help us to introduce the best practices and could help us to make this law as a model primarily for the Muslim world and many other parts of the world. Once again, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and happy holidays.